Hi everyone, this is Raphael, founder and CEO of Zenok Labs. Today we're going through our blueprint for how to build a startup from scratch. Building startups and new products and services is incredibly hard. The failure rate of small business is through the roof. And quite frankly, what makes this challenging applies to both entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs. So whether you're building a new product, service, or startup on your own or within a mature large organization, the blueprint more or less stays the same. So this should give you some pointers in terms of where and how to start and what some of the common mistakes are that are being made and how to overcome those. A little bit more about myself before we get started. My name is Raphael, founder and CEO of Zenok Labs. As I had mentioned, we are a consulting firm helping businesses grow faster. Before starting Zenok Labs, I was a principal at a company called Roivant for 5 years. We were a New York-based principal investor. We raised about $3 billion from SoftBank Vision Fund, Founders Fund, and other strategic and financial investors, and then deployed that capital into our own portfolio of startups, which I also help manage in addition to investing. We went public on a NASDAQ in September 21, and as sort of a principal investor, you go through many loops of building startups from scratch and investing in those. That's where I know this from. And then before being at Roivant, I started 2 successful startups myself, one in e-com, the other one in digital health. All right, without further ado, let's go right into this blueprint and start with a high-level overview of the phases that you see on the right. It starts with formulating a plan, then you go and learn by selling. You iterate on your plan, make a decision, find co-founders, build the product, continue to sell, raise venture capital, and ultimately scale rapidly. These are the basic or the high level, I shouldn't say basic, these are all challenging things to do. These are the high level phases, steps, parts of building a startup from scratch. Let's dive into each of those and have a little bit of a closer look. Formulating a plan. Minimally, what you want to think about when you get started is defining or identifying a problem that is meaningful. You want to define the vision, mission, and strategy of the startup. The vision is essentially the why you're doing this. The mission is which part of your overall vision you start addressing. So it's the what. And then the strategy is how you're going to realize the vision, the mission, knowing that if you actually actualize the mission, you are going to solve for the vision, which is a function of your problem. So there's this cascade that gives you a very good North Star in terms of where you're heading if you define it that way. Vision is the why, mission is the what, and strategy is the how. For example, my first startup in digital health, our vision was to solve or fix cardiovascular disease. We were focusing, and that's the mission, on helping consumers eat healthier, and the strategy was to pay consumers for eating healthier by partnering with FMCG companies in what you could call a marketing play. That's an example of this cascade. So that's the first part that you want to do as you formulate your plan. From there, you want to define on a very high level what your product, solution, or service is. If you're a startup, avoid services and go full on product solutions. If you are other types of businesses, you could obviously consider building a services-based business too. And many of the things that you will see here apply in that case too. What does that include? Well, it includes a list of features, benefits, and potentially thinking about pricing and business model. And that's really all that you need. You don't need to have very well refined mock-ups or high fidelity designs or anything at this stage. You need a concept. Then the next part, and that's going to be very important, is an initial thesis on what your go-to-market strategy is. Principally, I think a go-to-market strategy includes the who. So who are you targeting, your ideal customer? How are you reaching them? These are the channels and tactics you're potentially or going to trial to reach those ideal customers. And then the what is around what you're going to communicate to these leads and ideal customers in order to get them across the finish line to win them for whatever it is that you're building. These are the 3 building blocks of any go-to-market strategy on a very high level. And from there are a couple of other things you want to think about as you formulate your plan. You want to think about your lifestyle strategy, for instance. Are you building this as a side hustle while you're still working? Are you going to double down on this and use your savings in order to pay for expenses? These are some lifestyle decisions and that will influence the speed with which you progress the amount of work that you're able to put in, and also, quite frankly, the likelihood of, for instance, raising venture capital. And then the last 2 points are around just, thinking about what your resources are. How much funding do you have? Can you contribute yourself, for instance, for sales and marketing experiments, for a landing page that you want to put together? Maybe you know this stuff already. And so it's both financial resources and operational resources, where operational resources are about who's going to actually do stuff. Is that you? Or are you going to hire freelancers and agencies to get the stuff done? If you've been able to save a bunch of money over the course of your career, that could be a viable strategy for you to pursue, especially as you're still being employed, for instance. So the first part is about formulating a plan. Quick summary here: you want to have a problem, you want to have a vision, mission, and strategy, a high-level concept of what your product is, an initial thesis on what your go-to-market strategy is, considering who you're targeting, how you will reach them, and what you will tell them to win them, and then these additional things and considerations around lifestyle strategy and resources, financial and operational. All of that is preliminary, and you will see why in the next 2 steps. The next step is about learning by selling. I mean this the way I'm describing it here. The best way for you to learn about your target audience, your market, the product that you should be building, is by selling right away. Maybe you need a landing page. Ideally, you just need maybe a 1-pager or even just a sales script, including some paid ads on social platforms like Meta, in order to start getting in touch with your audience, learning what makes them tick, and then defining and redefining what it is that you're doing. Now, there are different levels of, let's say, good and bad in this phase. Ideally, as I mentioned, you would start with something as simple as a lead form ad on LinkedIn or Meta, set up a call for these people to speak to you, and then sell on the call and learn on the call that you have with your audience. It's going to be a little different whether you're B2B or B2C. But principally, it's like super light on assets and as fast as possible with the least amount of work going into starting to sell. The next level of good, or getting worse to some degree, is doing a landing page and then having people sign up for waiting lists. It's great. It doesn't really help you with raising venture capital if that's what you're thinking about, but at least you start experimenting with how to reach your audience, whether they sign up for your business and idea, whether the landing page that you have converts. And then the worst option of the 3 sort of things on the spectrum here that I'm discussing is building in the dark and not having any market exposure. I see especially technical founders and first-time founders do this mistake a ton of times, where they'll spend 12 to 18 months building something that's based on a lot of assumptions and need to believe, I should say, instead of trying to sell right away, while the value of the business is really only created through unique technology multiplied times your effectiveness in terms of selling. In this phase, as you go into the iterate on your product, on your plan phase next, listen to your gut. If it feels too hard to sell your first version of the thing that you have defined as your plan, that's a negative sign. It's product market fit, or let's say early signs of interest in what you're offering, doesn't feel terribly hard. It should be possible to get going pretty quickly. If you feel like there are any open assumptions that you haven't addressed in this phase, do make sure to address those. I've personally made this mistake where, for instance, in a digital health company that I was mentioning earlier, we trialed the concept with consumers, but we didn't test it with FMCG companies, because my assumption was, hey, if I have a large enough consumer base, FMCG companies are going to be interested in advertising anyways. That was a major assumption that I didn't validate, where I didn't learn about FMCG companies enough and how they tick, and ultimately led to us not performing as well as we could have. So leave no assumptions in this phase. Also try to, when you feel like there are dependencies, try to find ways to reformulate your plan to avoid dependencies. For example, you don't want the successful delivery of your product be dependent on a third party that makes decisions independent of your own business. You also don't want to be dependent on some kind of data that needs to be fed into your business by third parties that control that data. For instance, again, I'm going to refer to this digital health startup quite a bit because it's handy here. I made a lot of mistakes back then. For instance, in that instance, we were dependent on information on the quality of food products that would be supplied by consumers and to some degree FMCG companies. and put aside the likelihood that all of that information is entered correctly. It's just so much information that our entire business plan dependent on this data, which is hard to get. And then ultimately, I guess the bigger picture here in Learn by Selling, if you feel that there are any serious issues, do listen to them. And it could be about manufacturing requirements, capital expenditures, maybe you're a hardware business, maybe your customer acquisition cost is too high. All of these are actual things that are not going to go away over time. You may get slightly more efficient in your go-to-market strategy, but and your social reputation will certainly help over time. But these early signals matter. All right, now let's assume you have done that, and now you're going into the iterate on your plan phase. So the first one over here. In this phase, I think the baseline assumption needs to be that you will cycle through formulate a plan and learn by selling in sort of a loop where the selling helps you understand what's wrong with your plan, helps you iterate, and you keep going here until you have no more need to iterate on your plan. And you will need to, the goal here is to be as fast as possible so that you can get in as many reps of new strategies as you can before you run out of patience and money as the owner of the business, or whether if it's internally within a larger organization funding for what you're doing. It's really about speed to learning and persistence. Don't necessarily give up when it feels hard, and perseverance. Just keep going. Sometimes it's like a marathon. You got to run as fast as you can, but you got to think about that it's a longer duration than a sprint that you're going here. So run as fast as you can while being able to maintain that speed over a long period of time. Meaning, if you need to take off 2 to 3 hours just to relax and go on a walk, do it. Okay, make a decision is next. Once you have generated the data through selling and reformulated your plan a bunch of times, you will be in a better position to make a decision on whether this business is a viable opportunity, whether you still feel passionate about it, and whether you want to keep going. And you can also make a decision on what type of business this should be. Is this going to be a side hustle, which you keep running next to your business, maybe your employment, your full-time employment? Is this going to be a lifestyle business, like a services-based business, where lifestyle sounds a little unfair because services-based businesses and small enterprises in general are incredibly hard to build and maintain, even though go-to-market is slightly easier? Or is this going to be a venture scale business that you want to raise capital for and then get on that treadmill where you have to grow at all cost? You make that decision, and then ultimately, having learned, having iterated on your plan, and having decided on what it is that you do, that's a great point to bring in co-founders. Now, you could technically bring co-founders in at phase one, and it could be that you are already 2 people. But if you have not done that yet, I think it makes sense to bring them in at this point before you start building the product and before you continue selling. Because otherwise it gets too late. You will have put in too much money and time for your co-founders to own an equal share of the business, which is important for the success of it. So find co-founders at this stage. I think, if you're a technical co-founder or founder, definitely find someone that's my opinion. It's an N of 1, so it's just my opinion. But definitely find someone who is a business person. I mean that selling is the number one capability every startup has to have. And whenever you see a company going bankrupt, it's usually a function of them running out of funding because they haven't been able to hit sales milestones. And so bring in someone that is up for the challenge of thinking about how to commercialize your product once it's ready and get you on that learning path even before it's ready. If you're a business founder, then you may want to bring on a chief technical officer, but frankly, I think what will be more helpful is a chief product officer that understands and has some level of technical depth, where in the early phases of a startup, you really need someone that listens to the audience that you're selling to and refines and adapts the products based on that feedback, rather than someone that's in the technical details of GitLab and tries to figure out how to fix bugs. You can outsource the coding to, ChatGPT on one side and no-code tools on the other, but there are tons of cheap agencies and freelancers, or affordable, I should say, that you can find on platforms like Upwork and Fiverr without you having to be a CTO. If you're a CPO, you have both the business in mind and you speak the language of these people and understand and are able to recruit the right people and sanity check their work. That's my perspective on who you need. Next is actually building the product, and in the same spirit as what you have on top here, always this minimum viable approach. Never build something more complicated than it needs to be. Always try to remove features that are non-core. Always start with what is really core and do just that. For instance, let's say you want to do a digital health application in the mental health space, offering a chat application to consumers that want to have someone to talk to when they feel bad. Well, why would you build an application for that? Just do it in Telegram or in WhatsApp or in whatever other technical solution there is for you to start experimenting with how to build that product and how to start commercializing it and how to interact with consumers. Always do it in that way rather than spending 12 to 18 months in a basement and then coming out and learning after the fact, after you've already invested all of this time and money, that no one wants what you're building. It's a classic mistake founders make all the time. From there, you go into the continue selling phase. I should say that the build the product and continue selling phase are really one phase with obviously different subject matters, where all the time while you have new features, you want to have a community to go back to ask for feedback. You ideally are constantly building a pipeline in the B2B space, especially if you're an enterprise SaaS. It just takes a bit of time. If you're lucky, one of your potential leads or customers is also offering a co-development opportunity. You just need to continue selling throughout the entire period. That's where having a business founder or co-founder comes in handy. And then once you are able to demonstrate, hey, I've built an MVP and I have certain traction metrics that confirm and validate the idea, you should be able to raise venture capital. You'll probably start modestly with a small angel round that will cover some of your basic living expenses and maybe some development and marketing cost. And from there, go into your pre-seed, seed, Series A, Series B, and so on and so forth. The right timing will depend a little bit on the vertical that you're in. For instance, biotech obviously needs a lot more upfront capital without a lot of validation early on. But in like tech-based businesses, it's much easier to get going and get to initial validation with a check as small as 150, 350K. And investors are well aware of that. So if you come out right the gate, you haven't done anything yet, you just have a piece of paper that is your business plan, which opening brackets here a little bit, you don't need a business plan. In most cases, it's going to be a waste of time because things change too fast. But let's assume you've done that and that's all you're sending to a VC. In most cases, that's just not going to win them over. So at that point, you will want to raise venture capital. Know that once you've done that once, you will need to keep doing it. Venture capitalists don't necessarily make money by you generating cash flows through revenues, but by you raising more capital and having other investors put money on top of their investment. That is really how they make money until you go to the public markets, when things start to change a little bit and you go from a growth stage business kind of to a cash flow business or to a value business, whatever you want to call it. But that's a long time away. And then lastly, once you've raised venture capital, it's about scaling rapidly. This is primarily a function of two things. One, bringing the right people in place, i.e. hiring, and two, putting the systems and processes in place in order to make your workflows internally more efficient. For instance, on the sales side, this could mean that you're starting to get serious about CRMs, lead scoring, nurture campaigns, how you manage your SDR and AE team. SDRs are sales development representatives and AEs are account executives. That all becomes much more relevant in the scaling phase. But quite frankly, only 5% or less of or fewer of startups will mature into the growth stage, which is what this last stage really is about. So where most will struggle and fail is quite frankly this up here. So I guess on a high level, start as lean as possible, get to selling as fast as possible, and only start hiring, building, and investing more time and effort into a specific thesis once you have validation for yourself that there is something here. Until that point, keep iterating, keep persistently changing the plan until you find something that sticks. All right, that's it for today. That's the blueprint on how to build a startup from scratch. Hope you found this useful. If you enjoyed this content, make sure to like the video. If you have questions, make sure to drop them below as well. I'll get back to you ASAP with my answers and thoughts. And if you want to see more content like this, I'm working on exciting stuff here in the background. Do make sure to leave a subscribe so that you are in the loop when the newest stuff is coming out. Hope you enjoyed this and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.